So Andre, maybe you could, since you wrote the introduction to the most recent um, edition of Olivia, and it has the sort of publication history of Olivia, and maybe you want to go ahead and talk about that.
About the publication. Well, the book was written, I suspect, but we don't know, initially in French, but because she knew French very well, and she was the world translator, I mean, the English translator for André Gide, so that all his books have been translated by her. And she basically sent him a manuscript once, and he said he looked at it, but I don't think he read it. And this was not the first time that he's been guilty of that. And he probably discouraged her, and she went silent with her own writing and continued to translate him until 15 years later, when she's now in her early 80s and decides to publish it at the Hogarth Press, which is owned by Leonard Woolf, Virginia Woolf's husband. And it became an instant success in England and in the United States, and also in France, because it was translated by Roger Martin Dugard, who's a Nobel Prize winner, and who took the novel seriously enough to correct her French and also do it what was being said, because he claims that he doesn't know English very well, which is not unusual for French writers to say that, because the other person who's egregiously guilty of not knowing English was Marcel Proust, who translated two books by Ruskin with his mother. Right? So the book was successful, but then it kept disappearing. As you know, Stacey, it disappeared for many years and then came back and disappears. I read it when I was in my very, very early 20s on an airplane, having wanted to read it, and I was actually floored by it. I loved it. It was smart. It was sort of scrupulously investigating and analyzing emotions, which is what I love the best in any work of fiction. So I don't care about plot. So it had almost no plot, and that was what I wanted. So that's a sort of a roundabout way of explaining why I got to the book.
Yeah, so I think it's important to say first, since it hasn't been out of print until now. I think it's still been, continually in print, but so the story, for people who haven't read it, and anyone out there who hasn't read it, you should immediately hit that little button and order your copy and read it. Olivia is the story of an English schoolgirl of 16 who is sent off to boarding school in France. And while she's there, she falls very, very hard for the woman who runs the boarding school, whose name is Mademoiselle Julie, and who is very clearly based on a real woman who ran a boarding school in France named Madame Silvestre. And the book, which is quite slim, tells the story of kind of Olivia's coming to consciousness and sort of experiencing this overwhelming love. And then there is some tragedy. And she goes on, which really doesn't convey, as Andre said, there really is no plot. I mean, there's kind of like a lot of plot sort of at the end, but it doesn't convey the beauty of this and the kind of power of this. And so maybe we'll each read a little passage that, I picked one.
You picked one, okay? You tell me which one.
I picked one. I picked when she's looking at Mademoiselle Julie.
Oh, and realizes she's beautiful.
Yeah. So I'll just read this so that folks can get an idea of the sound and the flavor of it. So young Olivia is at the boarding school and she's listening to Mademoiselle Julie read Racine to them. And so this is the paragraph. There was a table in front of her with a lamp on it, which cast its light on her book and her face. I, sitting beside and below her, saw her illuminated and almost in profile. I looked at her for the first time as I listened. I don't know which I did more thirstily, looked or listened. It suddenly dawned upon me that this was beauty, great beauty, a thing I had read of and heard of without understanding, a thing I had passed by perhaps 100 times with careless, unseeing eyes. Pretty girls I had seen, lovely girls, no doubt, but I had never paid much conscious attention to their looks, never been particularly interested in them. But this was something different. No, it was not different. It was merely being awakened to something for the first time, physical beauty. I was never blind to it again. That just kills me. It's one of the many passages that kill me. Um,
I know, but it's absolutely stunning because it's a story of a young girl who becomes conscious of an attraction,
yeah,
but she doesn't use the word attraction.
yeah,
She doesn't even use the word love. She doesn't know. She wants to understand. And I'm sure that in the back of her mind, she thinks that if she got a grip on what it is that she was feeling, then she could come to terms with it.
yeah,
But she's not able to do that because it's so totally new. And that's what I think is so right about the little quotation at the beginning of the book by La Bruyere, another French writer, who
yeah,
says that you really have one love in your life, and it's the first ones. All the other ones that come afterwards are more or less less involuntary.
yeah,
Like you want to fall in love again, you know what the trajectory is, but she doesn't know, and so she's grappling with this thing, and she doesn't know. She knows that she wants to kiss her, she wants to be touched by her, but and those so she there's another scene that's absolutely wonderful where she says the only way I could deal with this was to imagine that I was falling in love with a man and that he was going to embrace me and hold me in his arms, and this was going to work for me.
yeah. But then she actually corrects herself and she says, no, no, that's not it.
That's not it. Yeah. She
Right?
knew that this was just a nice little fiction in her head in order to come to terms with it.
Yeah,
Because she has nobody told her about this.
yeah,
And maybe I can read another little scene
yeah,
where
yeah,
this is very short. And she says, she's talking to her friend, and tell me this, Laura. Does your heart beat when you go into a room where she is? Does it stand still when you touch her hand? Does your voice dry up in your throat when you speak to her? Do you hardly dare raise your eyes to look at her, and yet not succeed in turning them away? No, said Laura. None of that at all? What then? I insisted. Why, said Laura, looking at me with her clear, untroubled eyes, which had a kind of wonder and a kind of recoil in them. There's nothing else. I just love her. Which is not exactly what Olivia is feeling. Yes, it is love, but
yeah,
it's so complex,
yeah,
and there is no frame of reference for her. She has never talked about that with anyone. So
yeah,
she's discovering it herself. It's
yeah.
like Columbus going on to discover a continent and has no idea that it even exists.
Yeah, well, also as a kind of a footnote, it's widely thought that the character of Laura is based on Eleanor Roosevelt, who
Oh, yeah.
both Dorothy Strachey and Madame Sylvestre taught later. So I think also for folks who don't sort of know who Dorothy Strachey is and don't really, um, you might want to. So she was part of the Bloomsbury group. Her brothers Lytton Strachey and James Strachey um, were very deeply involved in that group. James Strachey was the translator of Freud. Um, and when she originally published this, she published it anonymously. And that was something that she was very, very, firm about, that it had to be published anonymously. And in fact, André and I were talking about the fact that the Virago edition this is my edition from 1987, and it's Olivia by Olivia.
This is my French edition of it, and it's Olivia by Olivia.
Yeah, by Olivia. Now it's Dorothy. The one that the Penguin Random House one is Dorothy Strachey. Right? Her married name was Dorothy Busey. And so the publication history is also complicated and there's the question of why she published anonymously, which I actually have some thoughts about. But I wanted to talk a little bit, maybe André, about the reading and rereading this book. And I want to talk about this because because I had a profound experience in rereading it this time to do this discussion. So I wanted to kind of share some of that and see if, see what your thoughts were. So this is my copy of Olivia from 1987, which is so long ago it's hardly even understandable. And in 1987, when I bought this, I was 26. What compelled me when I read it was the incredible depth and intensity and the particularity of Olivia's interiority. I mean, it was so, she really gives every moment its due. She dives into these incredibly powerful emotions that she can't name, right? She doesn't have a name for them. And as André said, not a lot happens, but everything happens within her, right? And it really compelled me. But in 1987, back in, way back, I'd been out for like 8 years. I lived with my girlfriend at a walk-up in Brooklyn. Dorothy Allison was my landlady. I went to marches. ACT UP was just getting started. We were in the middle of the AIDS crisis. It could not have been farther from a French boarding school, Bloomsbury, crushes on teachers, right? And I certainly knew the words, right? I knew all the words that Olivia doesn't say. And I was reading the book at 26 as a kind of an aspiring queer writer, right? And I was reading with that kind of a little bit of a sharp tooth of like, well, this is what these other people did, but here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to write about the out people. I'm going to write about modern people. Queerness isn't going to be an issue. It's not going to be a problem. It's going to be just the grounded being of these people. And it's definitely not going to be at boarding school or in France. It's going to be here and now. Look out, I'm coming. And I did write those books, which was great. But when I read it now, calendar pages fly, right? You never read the same book twice. I see it so differently. And it's actually so much more beautiful to me. She's 68, or maybe she was 61, who knows? She's in her 60s when she writes this book. Her brother translated Freud. She translated Gide. She's been deep in Bloomsbury. She knows the words too. She knew a lot of words, right? She spoke multiple languages. And what she says in her forward to the book is, I'm trying to get back to that time before reading all these books made me so self-conscious. She has lots of language, the writer, but she's trying to get back to a self who didn't have language yet, couldn't have, and wasn't self-conscious, right?
Yeah.
Wasn't comparing her experience to, what Gide wrote or Shakespeare wrote or, whoever else. And that just kills me now. That she wanted to do that and also that she could do that. Because think about how hard that is, right? To actually pull that off. So I kind of feel like actually now when I read Olivia, and I should probably read it God willing, I live that long, read it in another 30 years, right? There are kind of two books. There's the story that Olivia tells, but then there's an entire other book of everything that Olivia, the character, doesn't know, but that the writer absolutely knows, and that I think we know.
We do too. Actually, we do too. Absolutely.
We do too, and that she did that. That Dorothy Strachey Busey pulled that off. I just find incredible. I mean, I think in a funny way it landed harder on me now, than it did then. I understand it. I understand it. So I don't know, André, what was it like for you? And writing the intro.
I've reread it many times, and I've always loved it. For me, it is a very unusual English novel. In other words, the English tradition has not had many novels like that. I said in my introduction, there's like Sentimental Journey, which I adore also, which is also a French novel, and what is it called? The other one by I forget his name now. It doesn't matter. No, Maddox Ford, Ford Maddox Ford. Okay,
Yeah.
And again, these are novels that are not English. They are written in English, but they're not in the English. They are more in the French tradition, where The Good Soldier, for example. These are all novels that have an analytic bent, and the French are fantastic at this. They have a long tradition that goes back to the 1600s, basically, of writing stories where there's flimsy, shameful plots. There's no plot. It is all about human beings looking at each other, desiring each other, occasionally managing to say few words obliquely, never clearly enough, and sometimes running for cover. This is a tradition in France, and it has existed. And so Olivia, for me, was an unusual English book because it was written in exactly that tradition. And the one thing, and I think you used the word merciless, it is mercilessly analytic. It's not psychological in the Freudian sense. It just is completely, constantly, what I like to say, disabused. It just refuses to be fooled by easy answers. It keeps sort of penetrating constantly. And she's a great writer for that reason. I think she's a terrific writer because she's not going to give up. She's going to constantly take Olivia and put her in front of Madame Julie, or Mademoiselle Julie, sorry, and constantly have her tremble or shake or wanting to kiss her, wanting to be kissed by her, and accepting candies. I think of this. I'm going to come into your room tonight and I'm going to bring you a candy. I mean, okay, we can accept that as an old tradition, but it is nevertheless the kind of novel about a girl discovering something that she might not even be extremely excited to discover. She may not want to admit that this is what she's feeling. There's also that possibility. I think that in all desire, every desire that we feel for someone, there's a touch of shame, of regret, and sometimes we want to muffle it as much as we can because it's too much trouble. It's always there. It's always there. I mean, you think for example, the way that we all, when we're given a telephone number, in the old days, you got a telephone number and you had to call somebody, and you called because you had to, but you no longer wanted to. And yet, if they accepted the phone call and they were nice to you, you were very happy that you called. But you were terrorized. I was always terrorized. And I think that every human being is terrified of making an advance, unless you don't care.
Well, Olivia in the book does make advances constantly, right? She's always like hanging around and
knocking at the door
and demanding, but I agree with you that one of the things that's incredibly moving is the way that the narrator, who, it's interesting because we know that the narrator is older, right? But we don't know how much older. We know that the writer, Dorothy Strachey, was much older, but the narrator, it's like, it could be 10 years, maybe. right?
We don't know. We don't know when this was originally written. It might have been written when she was in her 60s, yes, but it might have been an old manuscript lying around that she didn't have the guts to publish. And I think that the reason why she was one of the reasons why she didn't want to publish it is a big contradiction because she was older than most members of the Bloomsbury group.
Yeah.
But at the same time, most of the people in Bloomsbury not only slept with each other, but most of them were gay anyway. There was no secret. So it was not such a shameful thing, such a taboo in this Bloomsbury group.
Well, it was still a taboo in the world,
In
but
the world, there was,
in
yeah.
the world, but I actually had a slightly different take on, I've been thinking about her anonymity or demi-anonymity, and, as you say in your introduction, I mean, you could figure out in like, anyone at the time could figure out in 5 minutes who she was. It really wasn't very, I think that maybe she chose to write this and then to publish it anonymously or pseudonymously, not for the freedom of identity, but for the freedom of expression. I mean, she says, not for shame about the queerness, but because she's trying to write something very, very emotionally raw, exposing, and this is a woman who, by the time she's writing this, whenever it was, this is a very sophisticated person moving in very sophisticated company. I think, I don't know, but in my mind, that's how she got to the page. That's how she got there, and that's how she
needed the possibility of not revealing who she was in order to get there. I agree. I mean, I don't think it's just because it was a queer story that she was not going to put her name on it. It's just that she felt there was something exceptionally intimate about the story.
It is exceptionally intimate.
It's so intimate, and but it's not at the same time that it's intimate. It is never embarrassing.
No.
Which is sometimes when you're very, very intimate in your writing, it can become like, oh God, oh my, it's too close, It never gets this way. I mean, she has that amazing grace, polish, whatever you want to call it, and at the same time, it is all raw emotion, which I think that to be able to do that is amazing.
Yeah, I mean, that it has gone in and out of print, that and the way Dorothy Strachey is seen in these different editions, in my Virago edition, Susanna Clapp wrote the afterword, and she it's really annoying because she spends a lot of time at the end of her afterword saying, well, really what this is, it's a love letter to Gide. It's like, really? I don't think this is a love letter to Gide. She probably did have a close relationship with his, whatever. But that's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. And I think that even now we have a very hard time apprehending Dorothy Strachey in all of her power and variousness. The unrequited crush on Mademoiselle Julie was not the end of Dorothy Strachey Busey's story. She went on and had relationships with other women. She married this painter. She, she had a big life and a big complex life.
Right.
And a lot of times when you see her mentioned, it's always about sister of, translator of, right? Which is incredibly obnoxious and diminishing, as if she can only be seen.
Yeah.
If we can only see her if we can navigate by these powerful male cultural figures, which is absurd.
I agree. I totally agree. I think that, but it's very easy to place her with her two brothers, and then they automatically, I think the tendency among most reviewers and critics is to allow it to be sort of obliterated by their very massive presence.
Yeah.
And I mean, the guy who translated James Strachey, who translated Freud, uh, is a person to be reckoned with even today.
Yeah.
I mean, his multi-volume set is an amazing enterprise.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
many of the words we use today in psychobabble are from him, not even from Freud. You know,
Right.
so
Right. 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 But I think that it comes to values, right? We value the massive,
yeah,
the
yeah,
the as opposed to the the liminal, the particular, the no one else. Other people could have translated Freud. They could have.
yeah.
Um, no one else could have written this book. Only she could have written this book.
I know, and
Um,
with her background too. I mean, she needed that French presence in her books, and they're all over the place. Uh, and she knows exactly her place, which is strange because she's very well known in France because of the fact that she was translated by this man who really didn't know much English,
mhm.
but he's famous and still read today. And but at the same time, she for some reason she doesn't command the presence, and yet, as you see, it couldn't be any more raw than this. I love when I read a book that's extremely well written and at the same time almost brusque and bold in its expression of sexuality. I mean, there's a moment in the book that I've always found amazing. She's waiting for Mademoiselle Julie to come and visit her,
Yeah.
and she's all excited, and she wants to know what her body looks like. And of course, the little mirrors that they put in your room are so small and so above
Yeah.
your shoulders that you can only see your face and your shoulders. She
Mhm.
wants to see the rest of her body, so she stands on a chair, and
Yeah.
obviously must have done something that gave her a great deal of joy. Um, but she's paralyzed and she's desiring. I mean, it's not even her head that's involved; it's her head, her heart, and her body especially. I mean, when we speak about the body, it's always very difficult as writers to write about what it is that the body needs, wants, etc., as opposed to what the head mandates.
Mhm.
And I find it took a lot of courage to write this book in this kind of bold manner. And yet, at the same time, it's so amazingly chaste.
It is. And
I mean, on the surface, it's
no, it is. And actually, one of the things that occurred to me on this reading,
uh-huh.
on this rereading, um, so there's a really important moment. This really is not a spoiler. You can't really do spoilers with this book because, I mean, there's some tragedy, but like, don't worry about it. But there's a moment when um, Olivia is talking to Mademoiselle Julie as they are about to part, to put it that way.
Right.
And Mademoiselle Julie says,
Oh.
she says, I've struggled. Wait, I marked it because I wanted to. It has been a struggle all my life, but I have always been victorious. I was proud of my victory. I wonder now whether defeat wouldn't have been better for us all as well as sweeter. And Olivia puzzles after that. Olivia says, what did she mean by that? What did she mean by that? Reading it this time, I thought my read of it was what she meant was all of my life, I have come right up to the line of consummation and struggled mightily and victoriously pulled back. But now I see the
Mhm.
damage that does, and I should have been defeated. Um, and that really blew my mind in reading it this time because I thought this entire book is about the damage of not doing. It is about the damage of not expressing not embracing,
Right.
not giving in, right? Because Mademoiselle Julie has been like sailing around the French boarding school, like getting everybody all in a swivet, for like billions of years. And then but she always stops. That's what I thought. I thought, oh, she always stops just in time. And now she sees, and it's devastating. I mean, it's just devastating. Now she sees that was the wrong choice.
Yep, she does.
That was wrong, right? I mean, I would read this book with The Beast in the Jungle, the famous novella by Henry James about the tragedy of not doing, right? I think maybe Dorothy Strachey was just too smart for 1949, and maybe too smart for 1979 and 1989 as well.
But not for today. I mean, today one says, "Oh my God, what a pity! What a waste! What regrets!" I mean, it is very painful. I mean, if you think about it, there's that wonderful scene where she's walking at night, passing by Olivia's bedroom, and Olivia is just on tenterhooks. She's nervous. She hopes that she's going to turn the knob of her door and open the door, but she doesn't. And the next day, she tells her, "I'm sorry I didn't come, but it's better that way. Yeah. By the way, what you were entertaining in your head are just fantasies, chimeras. That's what it was." And she tells her something which is very weird. I don't know if it comes off in. She said it in French, and I don't know if it's in English. She says, "I loved you. I loved you well enough." That's what she is. Je t'ai bien aimé. In other words, it's not "I loved you." It's je t'ai bien aimé. In other words, I loved you in a nice manner, which is
that in a Metro card will get you right on the subway. Like, no, and Dorothy Strachey knows that.
Yeah. Yes.
Dorothy Strachey knows. She knows that. But also, André, I wanted to ask you like a difficult question, which is the kind of thing that comes up quite a lot now, which is, so I know that you were instrumental in bringing the book back into print, which is fantastic. And you also wrote the introduction, and I wondered if it occurred to you that a queer writer might have done the introduction, or that that there's anything about that that crossed your mind.
You know what? I read this in 1971. And I was on an airplane when I was reading, and then I read it throughout the whole plane ride from Paris to New York. And it affected me. I lent it to many friends. They would return the books, and then eventually I kept buying the book again, and they would never return it to me. Either they didn't read it or they lost it, whatever. But for me, it was such an important book because it taught me many lessons that I had already learned from other writers, particularly French writers, especially Stendhal, which was very important to me. Where sometimes in Stendhal, there is no plot. Mm-hmm. And I wrote my dissertation on Madame de Lafayette, where there is absolutely no plot in that. Mm-hmm. It's all about people looking at each other and knowing that one is in love with the other, period. So for me, it was a very important book, and I wanted to see it resurrected, and many times it would resurrect and it would disappear. So as a writer who wanted this and who understood the French tradition, whence it derives, I think I should have been the one to do it, and I wanted to do it. Now, if a queer person should have done it instead of me, I don't know. It's too complicated a question. I don't pretend to understand what a girl of 16 feels for a woman who is much older than him. Not much older. I suppose she might be at least, I think, at the most, in her early 40s. Yeah. I would say. I wouldn't understand it, but that's not what really interested me. What interested me was the style of the book, which is sometimes seemingly sort of ordinary, but it's not. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, I was interested in the analytical bent that the author had. And so I thought I understood that, and I have used it in many of my own books. So I wanted to do it. So, and it wasn't for the money. Put it this way.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting the doors through which we come to books, right? I definitely wasn't doing my PhD in French lit, right? You know, I mean, I came to it through the door of queer life, queer culture. It is from Olivia that the women's music label Olivia Records got its name, right? I was looking for my archive.
Yeah.
I was looking for my, you know, I was looking for my people. And it's actually been a gift to come back to the book again now and feel that she still is my people. It's a queer book about queer feelings, right? It's about things for which we do and don't have names.
Right. And certainly at that time, they weren't names. There were no names at that time.
No. And so I just think that's so beautiful. And I've actually been scouring around looking for more info about Dorothy Strachey, which there actually is not a lot. You know, and I think, you know, now even more, I think, who were you? Who were you?
Yeah.
There's this terrible sadness that she had a daughter who died a week before Dorothy Strachey died, and Dorothy Strachey didn't know it actually, which is really a mercy. But it's like, who was she? What was that life? One thing that also really struck me about this is that the real Mademoiselle Julie, Madame Silvestre, lived a very long and happy life. Set up her school again. She had to leave France because of the Franco-Prussian War, set up in England. Dorothy Strachey went and taught there, so they were colleagues. Eleanor Roosevelt was both of their students. It seems like Madame Silvestre had, you know, a very happy life with various women, you know, partners. And so, you know, life went on in a very, these were two grown-up women who knew each other very, very well, right? So, yeah, I'm quite fascinated by who she was. And, you know, is there an archive of Dorothy Strachey?
There must be, but I don't know if it's closed or not. I have no idea. And I'm sure there are people wanting to write dissertations today on her life and her work. I mean, she was a very famous translator.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, it reminds me of William Weaver, who knew every single, you know, Italian author and then translated them all throughout his whole life. It's amazing. I mean, she did know Gide and she knew Roger Martin du Gard, and she must have known dozens of others. And she was also very, I mean, she was part of this world of people that was Bloomsbury. I mean, it's an amazing. If you remove Bloomsbury from as a group from English literature, you don't have 20th century literature, period, or art.
Right, absolutely. Right, absolutely. And they were all queer. They were all everything.
They were, yes.
But I feel like now it's sort of the way I felt when I was 26. Like I'm looking at this photo of all these people, and I see her over there, and I want to. It's like I keep on wanting to get closer. Like, who were you? Who were you? Or you know, just tell me more, right? Tell me more. You know, the man she married was the son of a shoemaker. He was a painter. Her family was very much against it.
Which I think is also very important because the family were snobs, but at the same time, they were also, I mean, they couldn't care less about middle class or Victorian values. They were above the whole thing, but they were also snobs. And so the mix is an interesting one.
Yeah. I don't know, maybe someone in the audience knows, you know, has access to the deep Dorothy Strachey well. Do we want to maybe open it up for questions?
I think, yeah.
Okay, if you haven't put your question in, now's a great time. We do have one that's got several in it, actually. So,
Okay.
let me see. I'm going to ask this one. It's more general for both of you. What thoughts do you have on taking inspiration from other literature compared to taking inspiration from real life?
Who is this for?
Both of you.
You go ahead first.
You know, I'm a real both and kind of person. And I don't see a big, I don't think those things have to be divided at all. Books are real, right? They're in the world, they're on the shelf. But I don't really think we have to choose. And in fact, we don't choose and we can't choose. And we take inspiration not only from books, but from music, from art, from things we overhear in the street, from places we go to dance, from, you know, you can't, I think that, and you can't actually control what inspires you. You might think you've been inspired by Proust, ends up you were inspired by Survivor season 5, you know, that's what emerges. So I don't think we have to choose, and I also think we can't control it anyway. So why try? André?
I mean, in my case, I lived a very sheltered life in my teens, especially, and so I read a lot, and I always was surprised. Suddenly, I got dark. Oh, I read a lot, and it was that was my contact with reality, and I have maintained throughout my life. I have many friends, I have a family, etc., etc. But in point of fact, I have always been very reluctant to embrace realism as a tradition. I never liked it. I don't consider myself a realist writer. I'm interested in the emotions and the strategies that people use with each other when they want something from one another. And I found that I have been more influenced by the books I've read and by the films I've seen, and particularly the films of Eric Romer, whom I happen to adore, than I have been by my contact with people. People may furnish a little template for something that I will later develop thanks to my reading of books and seeing the films that I've seen and liked. I tend to, as a writer, I tend to repeat myself in a different key, I hope, but it's always the same thing. I'm interested in what people imagine their lives should be and why they cannot do that, why they cannot bring it about.
And Andre, for you, along those lines, what other books besides Olivia inspired Call Me by Your Name?
Call Me by Your Name is inspired by so many other works. It is particularly inspired by, and they're all quoted in the book, so I gave away the answers. One is a book called Armance by Stendhal. The other one is a book by Marguerite de Navarre called The Heptameron, where it's a story about this knight who falls in love with this princess, or sort of princess. And of course, he's at the lower station, and so he cannot have her, and she won't have him, but she's in love with him, and he's in love with her. And of course, the book I wrote my dissertation, and all of Proust, of course, has influenced me tremendously. So I'm there sort of writing Call Me By Your Name. It's set in Italy. It's at a beach. It's about two men who are attracted to each other, who fall in love. And at the same time, I have La Princesse de Clèves in the back of my mind, which is a book divided into 4 parts. I divide my book in 4 parts, and so on. So there are so many moments of similarity between them, but they're so concealed at the same time that you wouldn't know.
Great. Another question: besides, other than yourself, André, do either of you see any contemporary literary heirs to Dorothy Strachey?
That's a good question. You answer it because you probably know better than I do.
Well,
I should turn on my light on.
that's a really good question. I'm trying to think of someone working now. You know, I'll tell you, the thing is, there's certainly, I mean, there are lots and lots and lots more queer writers since, you know, it is a different world. I mean, obviously, right? Although it's worth noting that Olivia was 1949, Giovanni's Room was 1956, which was also a huge hit. And, you know, the 50s might have been a little different than we thought. But anyway, you know, obviously there are many, many more queer writers in print and doing a lot of really, really interesting things. I think what I'm having a hard time summoning is a queer writer working now who is very, very interested in regret, the unsaid, the not done. And someone out there may be able to think of a title. It's not a popular stance.
It is not, but I can.
It's a popular stance in modern American fiction. We're not so big on a kind of profound melancholy and irretrievable loss and limits. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I'm blanking on that. I mean, maybe Alan Hollinghurst, the most recent one, the something affair, about the guy, about the scandal and the crime. We don't like it so much that the glancing.
You know, there's a reason for that. There's a kind of reason is that I think we want, you use the word once, but I'll use it for a second time in this conversation, consummation.
Yeah.
We don't want the absence of consummation. It really annoys us. It almost offends us. We want them to sleep together. I wrote a whole book and novel about two people who do not consummate their relationship. And you clearly know that they want to. They don't make a secret of it. But it doesn't happen in the novel. And it annoyed people. But I will tell you something else, that the letters I got from people who had read Call Me By Your Name back in 2007, by people who were in their 80s and 70s, late 70s, they were long letters. They were very unusual because they were basically sweeping they gave you a sweep of their lives filled with regrets. I never had a conversation with my father. I never had that kind of conversation with my father. I never came out to my parents. I've never been even gay. I've never had a relationship my whole life. And you just showed us what this. I'm telling you, these letters are extremely long and very tearful. And I don't receive them any longer because I think the initial public was much older and responded to the book in that way. And I've kept all those letters because they were very, very moving. Anyway, so.
Yeah, I don't know. If someone out there is like, has a name, right, you know, there are heirs in the sense of beautiful, amazing queer writers for sure, and female queer writers who are like, for sure, absolutely. But the loss in the book, I'm not thinking, something is not, anyway, someone out there may be smarter than me. Probably lots of people out there are smarter than me, so.
A few things that popped up in the chat were Sarah Waters, Philippe Besson.
No, I know, but Sarah Waters, it's not, those aren't, actually the closest, okay, so the closest one would be maybe Written on the Body, Jeanette Winterson, where the lover, is gone over the course of the narrative, and there's this tremendous loss from where that lover was. No, I mean, I know those names too. It's not that. I'm trying to think of the sort of invocation of the unlived life. That's what I'm trying to think.
I mean, if you think about the example, the best example I think in history of literature is Death in Venice.
Sure,
or even the novel, the movie itself is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
I mean, there you have a story of basically the man is in love with a young kid, and he's not going to do anything. He cannot do anything. He just looks at him, and you know exactly what his thoughts are, and it's extremely well done. And that's it. It's filled. You said the right word. It's the word regret. We don't like regret.
Yeah.
We don't like it at all in our lives, and we don't like to see it in books either.
No, I'd much rather go to the party.
So one more question. Before we went live, you two were talking about the film that was made, and I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit and about what your dream remake would be for this.
Oh, I'm not a film person, so I wouldn't really know how to answer this. But I saw the film. I saw it a few times, and I never saw it in one complete sitting, because it's one of those black and white movies that have very long scenes that are unnecessarily long and are not penetrating. The characters are more or less stock characters. The German lady is mean. The Mademoiselle Julie is nice but extremely strict and almost chillingly so. And the girl Olivia is not that interesting as a character, and it just doesn't work. And the ending is totally different, by the way.
I have to confess that I meant to watch the 1951 movie before this event, but I didn't. But I definitely have thoughts about the remake. If there are any screenwriters out there, you should get on this right now. I think Kelly Reichardt would do an amazing job if she could do with this what she did with Old Joy, which is one of my favorite movies. There are filmmakers, I think Jane Campion could do an amazing job with this. There are lots of people out there who could do this, and now, Greta Gerwig, if you're listening, Little Women really worked out. I think that would be fantastic, because what André is describing is a kind of a sort of a melodrama, and it's like, Mademoiselle Julie is not strict. That's one thing actually that she is not. The woman who made, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on her name, but the woman who made Portrait of a Lady on Fire, which was fantastic, and is very much in this mold of a kind of deep interiority and intimacy and characters coming together and affecting one another in all of these ways. Chiama, that's her name. I think she should get right on it. And I think
you would be the best person for it.
Yeah, I think we're due. That's what I think. So, yeah.
Perfect.
Well, this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you, both of you, for this.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
And thanks everybody who attended. Again, you can get a copy of Olivia by pressing on that button over there.
Try it right now.
Yeah.
There it is.
Thanks again, and I hope
That's a very short book. It's
Yeah, right. It's tiny. See how short it is?
94 pages.
Yeah.
It's a perfect beach day read, right?
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Night.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Stacey. Thank you,
Thank you,
Melanie.
André.
Thank you.
Thank you.